Today we're discussing some Necron rules previews from Warhammer Community, new stats and special rules for the Void Dragon, the Necron Monolith, and the Silent King. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're doing a bit of a roundup for all the rules that we know about these guys so far, and I must say that some of these rules are looking incredibly scary for the Necrons, particularly that Void Dragon. In the video we'll look at what they've previewed and talk about how strong these rules are likely to be. Let's jump straight into it, starting with that new Catan. So first of all we have the beautiful and disturbing Void Dragon miniature, who does seem to have got a bit of a stat line buff compared with the previous Catan. Compared with the Nightbringer, he's gained an additional wound, an additional attack, and he's also got a 3+ save, unlike the Nightbringer, who at least in the previous edition was only protected by a 4+ invul save. The 9 wounds does mean that he shouldn't be targetable, as the Catan up to now have always been characters, which means that your opponent shouldn't be shooting him turn 1 at least, which combined with his Necrodermis rule, which we'll see in a second, could make this guy just ridiculously problematic for your opponent. On the damage dealing front, he's got the Spear of the Void Dragon, which he can either throw at range or attack in melee with his 5 attacks. At range it's a 12-inch heavy 1 weapon with strength 9, AP -4 and damage d6. I suspect most of the time with that short range it'll just be essentially a single shot, but it has a special rule where you draw a line between this unit and its target unit, and every unit that it passes over you also get a hit against. It does mean that you might be able to spear multiple vehicles or something if you happen to have them all lined up in a row. So essentially a boosted las cannon shot against some things, but if you do make an attack against a vehicle with it, the damage characteristic changes to d3+3 rather than just d6. Quite a big boost, and is going to make him very good at hunting vehicles, as that's an average of 5 wounds from a successful wound, compared with the average of 3.5 from a roll of d6, and d6 damage is more random than the d3+3 as well. In melee he's basically attacking with the exact same profile, strength +3, so strength 9, AP -4 and damage d6. Again, if he does manage to be in contact with a vehicle, then you'll get d3+3 damage against it. So all very good there, a decent amount of damage coming out of him, and he will likely be getting those powers of the Catan as well. So I'm sure he'll be throwing around some antimatter meteors or whatever else to throw out a bit of mortal wound damage. However, it is this Necrodermis special rule that really has the potential to make him very, very strong in my opinion. Now Necrodermis is a rule that all the Catan have, and up to now it's just given a 4+ invul save. According to the White Dwarf preview, it is now massively stronger and is very similar to some of the rules that we've seen previously, such as Ghazghkull Thraka in the Orc book. Now Necrodermis means that you get a 4+ invul save, and in addition the model cannot lose more than 3 wounds in the same phase. Any wounds that would be lost after that point are not lost. Honestly, I think this has the potential to be borderline broken, particularly if this is farmed out to the other Catan shards, the Transcendent Catan, the Nightbringer and the Deceiver, and in the right situation it could have these guys running rampant around the enemy army for the entirety of the game. Even if you made no attempt to screen the Catan whatsoever, if you were playing against some sort of shooting opponent, you'd only ever be able to lose them on turn 3. It can only deal 3 damage per shooting phase, so you should get a couple of turns of uninterrupted damage dealing. However, most players I think will be screening these guys turn 1, which means that the opponent shouldn't be able to shoot them before turn 2 at the earliest, pretty much guaranteeing that they'll be living into turn 4 when the game could well be winding down by then. I know there may be armies that are able to damage it in multiple phases, maybe shoot it and then follow up with a charge, which could potentially get you 2 phases of 3 damage on them, but even then it's not guaranteed. A few decent successful invuls in a fight phase could potentially stop you even taking 3 damage, even if it is charged by a fighty character or something. It'll make this guy absolutely excellent for securing objectives, as you could just put him down on a primary objective and know that your opponent is guaranteed not to be able to shoot him off that no matter what they throw at him. And there are just all sorts of uses that you can use for a model that you know is definitely not going to die next turn. I know we have seen incarnations of this rule before on Ghazghkull and an Exalted Bloodthirster I believe, but to have it on a character model that you're going to be able to screen from direct shooting is just going to take the annoyance factor to a whole other level. I think you'll be happiest jumping out from behind your own screening units, killing a bunch of enemies, and preferably still remaining at least somewhat screened to the majority of enemy shooting. We do know he has one other special rule called Matter Absorption. This one's a minor healing buff, which means that if he kills an enemy vehicle, either with his shooting or melee attacks or with his Catan powers, you roll a dice and on a 2+, it regains 1 lost wound. To be honest, this one wouldn't be such a big deal if it weren't just combined with his Necrodermis, because say if you managed to chip off 6 wounds off him and he regains 1 more when he had 3 left, then it means that you won't be able to kill him in 1 phase next turn. Just that additional 1 wound gained is going to buy him an entire extra phase of life potentially. Honestly, it looks like this guy's looking incredibly scary. Unless his points costs are absolutely astronomical, I could certainly see him being fielded in other Necron lists. It might not just be him though. If these Necrodermis rules are the same for the rest of the Catan, I'm certain we'll be seeing a lot more of them in the future, maybe even Catan spam lists. So next up we come to the Monolith, which we've seen a few stats to, and it just seems like a bigger, better Monolith in every single way. To be honest, the Monolith has been underwhelming for really quite a long time now. It's not really been worth taking in Necron lists, as it just costs too many points for what it does. Both its defensive and offensive capabilities seem to have been upgraded, and it's gained an additional 4 wounds, putting it at 24 now, which is pretty much on par with other factions' super heavy vehicles. I'm just a little bit concerned they might turn it into a Lord of War choice for Necrons rather than a heavy support one, which honestly would be a bit of a disaster, as it would have a big command point cost to fielding it. Hopefully it'll just remain a heavy support. In terms of its weapons, pretty much everything is now stronger. The particle whip enormously so. It used to be only 24 inches, strength 8, AP -2 and damage D3. It's now a 36 inch range weapon with heavy D6, strength 12, AP -3 and damage 3. It's also got the blast rule to boot, which could be handy against some heavy infantry perhaps. Still a little bit random due to the number of shots, but should be good for on average around 3 or 6 wounds on a standard enemy vehicle each turn. The flux arcs are a little bit more potent as well. They used to be 24 inch heavy weapons, now they're 30 inch rapid fire 3 weapons, and as it has 4 of them, that should be really quite nasty against enemy infantry that get too close. Not a lot of enemy infantry units are going to be wanting to take 24 strength 5 AP -2 shots. You will be able to swap them out for the death rays though if you want to, and you want a bit more anti-tank punch. It does seem that these weapons are indeed death rays, but they're smaller than the Doomscythe's version of the death ray, being only heavy 1, strength 9, AP -3, but getting damage D3+3. There does seem to be a trend for quite a lot of the heaviest weapons going to damage D3+3, making them just a little bit more dangerous to vehicles. So the Monolith could be putting out some very decent anti-tank firepower. It's going to be interesting to see how the points shake out, for whether the Flux Arcs or the Death Ray is going to be more worth it. Finally, that Portal of Exile has become a melee weapon. It's now Strength User. The previous Monolith was Strength 8. It's AP -3 and damage 3, and it gets around the traditional low weapon skill of vehicles by automatically hitting the target. It does look like it could be a decent melee deterrent, and potentially deal some decent damage to any enemy units that charge the Monolith but don't kill it. Overall, looks good, certainly stronger, though whether or not it gets included in Necron lists is going to depend on how many points it costs. Finally, we've got an absolute ton of previewed rules for the Silent King, who I strongly suspect is going to be a Lord of War choice for the Necrons, and will have that Supreme Commander keyword, meaning that you could basically field him for free in a Supreme Command detachment. We had already seen his profile before. He's Movement 8, Weapon Skill and Ballistic Skill 2+, Strength 5, though will get more for his close combat attacks, Toughness 7, 16 wounds, 6 attacks, Leadership 10 and a 3+ save, and he's accompanied with 2 Triarchal Menhirs, which are 5 wound, Toughness 7 things that I think are mainly there just to take shots for him, though they do have their own range damage output. I strongly suspect that he will have an invul save or some extra protection. I would guess he's probably not going to get quantum shielding, though I guess it isn't impossible. But either way, I really hope that he has some sort of rules to make sure he doesn't just get shot off the table turn 1, which really can be a bit of a downside to fielding really big points intensive models that can be direct targeted, for example Magnus or Mortarion. Those Menhirs do pack a fearsome ranged punch, having some of the most powerful single shot weapons in the entire game of 40k. They're both armed with Annihilator beams, which are 36 inch range, heavy 1, strength 12, AP -4, and a flat damage of 6. They'll be hitting on 2s as well, so very highly accurate. They're wounding most vehicles on a 3+, so on average I think you're likely to be getting 1 wound through on a hard target. Could be a very good use of a command reroll to reroll a failed wound roll from one of these. There aren't all that many weapons where you can reroll 1 dice and have the potential to do 6 damage. The Silent King himself has a little bit more shooting as well with his Scepter of Eternal Glory. This one's got a 24 inch range, it's Assault 3, Strength 8, AP -3 and damage 2. A pretty helpful bit of general purpose shooting there, going to be pretty comfortable killing a few infantrymen or putting a few wounds on a hard target. And he also attacks very similarly with that Scepter of Eternal Glory in close combat. He'll be Strength 9, AP -3 and damage 2. To be honest, it's not bad melee damage output, but it's not necessarily spectacular if you're comparing to say Rebute Gilliman or the Demon Primarchs. To be honest, I think that this guy has a lot more of his damage loaded into the range damage output and his buffing abilities as opposed to just being a melee beatstick. He'll still be putting a very decent amount of damage to anything that he makes contact with, but he won't just be obliterating vehicles in the same way as the Primarchs can. I strongly suspect that those 2 other Pharaon attendants will be able to make their own additional attacks with their own power weapons though. They probably won't be quite as strong, but I'd imagine that he's going to get a fair few additional attacks that could help out against infantry. Talking of the Pharaons, they appear to be his source of rerolls. The Pharaon of the Stars will buff Triarch Praetorians and Necron core units to have 4 rerolls to hit in the shooting phase, though currently we are still waiting to find out exactly what sort of Necron units are going to have the core tag. In any case though, he could be keeping Necron warriors and immortals very highly accurate on the move. The Pharaon of the Blades, however, is an aura that gives you 4 rerolls to wound in the fight phase, again on Necron core units and the Triarch Praetorians. This one does sound very powerful indeed, and will be a really significant buff to Triarch Praetorians with their mid-strength weapons, or potentially to units like Lichguard with war scythes. As well as those rerolls, we know that he has 3 other special rules. First of all, Noctilith Beacons, which allows him to deny the witch once as if he were a psyker. Not bad on a model that's likely to be taking the centre of the battle line. He has Obeisance Generators, which is a really powerful combat debuff, meaning that enemy units can't attack until all the Necron units in your army have done so, which means that even if his close combat is maybe a slight bit more mediocre than other Lord of War choices, he will be guaranteed to be getting it first. Very powerful if he potentially manages to end an enemy threat that's charging him before it even gets to attack. I think a lot of units just really aren't going to want to charge this guy, potentially even dedicated melee specialists if they're not tough enough to weather the attacks of that Scepter of Eternal Glory in melee first. Finally, he has the Voice of the Triarch, which is an interesting one to manipulate Necron command protocols. As we know, you must select 5 of these before the game, and 1 is generally not used. If the Silent King is on the board though, then you can take that unused one and potentially sub it in instead of any other one when you get to that battle round. Honestly, it could be quite useful for keeping a valuable one in reserve, so you're able to deploy it just as you need it, rather than hoping that you've selected the optimal turn when it's going to be coming into effect. I think that could be very powerful and very useful. My only concern is if the Silent King happens to die before you get to that protocol, then you'd essentially never be able to use it in-game. Still though, adds an interesting bit of flexibility, and it allows you to assess how useful your current command protocol is, and whether or not the reserve one might be better. So some interesting and powerful rules there, and I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on the full copies of the rules whenever they're out. I'll certainly be reviewing all these miniatures in full in the near future. Overall though, at the moment, that Catan Necrodermis does seem to be one of the most powerful things out of this entire book. Let me know what you think down in the comments below as always. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this from Auspex Tactics. And if you have been enjoying my videos and you'd like to help support the channel, then there's a link to the channel's Patreon page, which can be found down in the video description. Channel Patrons get to see videos early each day, there's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you also get automatically entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway with a chance to win some big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.